All right, Shabbosai, good morning, good morning. Let us begin. Sorry for the just a couple of moments of delayed start. Mir Hashem, begin by thanking our sponsors. Thank all of our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tishrei, Jerry and Sarah Wolaski, for dedicating all the shiurim in the schus for Refuah Shlema for Zachariah Dov and Perel Shira, Shane Dean Avram Kelman in memory of their beloved parents, and in the schus of all those who need a refuah shalima, Dr. Linda Weinberg in loving memory of her husband, Dr. Paul Weinberg, parents Moshe ben Avram David, Selma Wolf with immense gratitude to Hashem, and with tefillos for health for all in the new year, and Leah's soul as a schus for refuah shalima for her daughter Ilana Bas Esther, and for all those in need of Yeshuas. Our week of learning sponsors, Jeff Schwartz, an appreciation for the Daf Yomi program, and a day of learning sponsor, an anonymous sponsor in honor of Avron Elbaum for his commitment to running the Yom Noraim davening at the expense of his own davening. Wow, what a beautiful recognition of the Mesiras Nefesh of our Gavai. Absolutely beautiful. All right, so with that, let us begin. A lot to do today. Today's daf is Mem Hey 45, and we are picking up Emirat Hashem on Mem Daled Amud Beis 44b. Let's just pick up again at the two dots. Says the Gemara, Itmar, Kitana Shnes Kachel Das Avia. What happens if if a girl accepts Kiddushin without the knowledge of her father? So remember again, we were talking about yesterday's daf was pretty much all about the machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish regarding what happens or who has the ability for an Nara Murasa to be makabel her get, to be makabel her Kiddushin. So now we're moving on a little bit into another interesting sugya regarding what happens if a katana goes ahead and accepts Kiddushin without the knowledge of her father. A precocious young lady. So what happens? So what's the halacha? Amar Shmuel tzricha get tzricha miyun. Shmuel says she requires a get, and she also requires miyun. Now, both remember, so get is a get. Miyun is the process. What does miyun literally mean? Refusal, right? Miyun is the process by which rabbinic marriage is dissolved. Specifically, the type of rabbinic marriage that a kitana is entered into by either her mother, her brother, in the absence of her father. So she requires get and requires miyun. Amar Karna, so Karna said that doesn't make any sense. Dvarim, so we'll say that's Shmuel, right? Shmuel says she requires a get and miyun in order to get out of this. Karna says that doesn't make sense. Im get lama miyun, im miyun lama get. In other words, there's no reason you should require both of those processes. Remember again, get is used to dissolve an actual marriage. Miyun is used to dissolve a rabbinic marriage. So where there's get, there's no miyun. Where there's miyun, there's no get. Why should you require both? So I'll say, so what do we do? Amrulei. So they said, Amrulei, Hamar Ukva Beidina Bekafri. You know, Mar Ukva and his Beis Din, they're in the city of Kafri. So let's go ahead, and Rav is also there as well. Rav's on that Beis Din. Let's go ahead and send this Shaila there. But they did something interesting. Avchuha, so they changed the shitas. So in other words, you'll see why in just a moment. So they attributed Karna's shita to Shmuel, Shmuel's shita to Karna. So when they went ahead and they posed the question to Rav, as we're going to see, the question went like this: if a katana received Kiddushin without the knowledge and consent of her father, what's the halacha? Shmuel says she doesn't need anything, right? Or I should say, she either needs a get or miyun, but not both. And Karna says she needs a get and miyun. That's how they sent the shayla, and they said, who's correct? So Shazru kam lekamei derav, Amrlu Elokim, tzricha get tzricha miyun. So Rav said, of course, she requires a get and she requires miyun. V'chas le'lazari de Abba bar Abba, de nemahachi. And woe to the offspring of Abba bar Abba. We'll say Abba bar Abba ultimately again is Shmuel. Woe to the offspring of Abba bar Abba who says that she doesn't. Now we'll say Rashi points out over here, the reason why they went ahead and they switched the shitas was Shmuel and Rav were very close. So they wanted to see how Rav would paskin. Would he just automatically side with Shmuel, or perhaps again if they mixed up the shitas a little bit, they wanted his true psak and they didn't want him to feel that he had to side with Shmuel. So it turns out that it worked, and he said Shmuel's of course 100% wrong, which in actuality meant Shmuel was 100% right, and therefore in this kind of situation she requires both a get and miyun. The time of Mai. Why do you need a get and miyun? So Amar Rav Acha Breid Rav Ika Tzricha get Sheman Esrasa Kiddushin. So number one, you need a get. Very interesting. What are we concerned about saying? You need a get because maybe after the fact, the father was happy with the daughter's actions. There is maybe, even though again a Ketana isn't empowered to accept Kiddushin on her own, but maybe in this case, after she did it, the father would say, great. And therefore again, it's a valid marriage, or at least the Gemara is suggesting that it should be a valid marriage. Tzricha mion, and then she requires mion. Why? Shemalon is ratzabe Kiddushin. We'll say, watch, let's play this out. Because maybe the father doesn't want the Kiddushin. Right? V'yomru ein Kiddushin tovsim achos. And I will say, what's the problem? Once you require a get, so this girl is going to look like a grusha. Now, if she's a grusha, who else? So let's just play this out. Let's say Rachel is the Ketana, right? So Rachel went ahead and accepted Kiddushin from Ruvain without her father's knowledge. So now we're saying the halacha is like Shmuel. She requires a get, she requires miyun. She requires a get, why? Why get? The concern ex post facto, the father really wanted the Kiddushin, and therefore he needed a get to actually unravel the Kiddushin. Why do you need miyun? See, miyun is the response to the get. Because once Ruvain gives Rachel a get, then I will say, interestingly enough, as a divorcee, who else can't Ruvain marry? Rachel's sister. Now, but that's not really true because there wasn't a marriage here, right? So we do miyun to show that there wasn't really a marriage. In other words, that the miyun becomes necessary after the get was given in order to remove any vestiges of marriage or repercussions of Rachel being a divorcee upon Ruvain. Interesting. Rav Nachman. So the Gemara says, so Rav Nachman says, by the way, all of this only assumes that there were previous discussions about marriage. Now, as Rabbi say, let me clarify this. When Rav Nachman says like this, when do we have to be concerned that maybe the father ex post facto wants this? When there was some previous discussion of a marriage between Ruvain and Rachel. So then again, and now what happens? Now the story makes a little bit more sense. So now Rachel went ahead and was makabel Kiddushin on her own without her father's knowledge. Then maybe there's a concern that ex post facto, the father maybe wanted this relationship as well. Ula Amar, so I'll say fine. Ula, first wide line. Ula Amar afilu miyun ein tzricha. Ula says that she doesn't even need miyun. In the case like this, why? Afagav, the Gemara says, Afagav l'shitchu. Now, is that true even if there were previous discussions of marriage? To which the Gemara says, no. Man de masniha, lo masniha. The truth is, there's two separate conversations going on over here. And there's Rav Nachman's statement about shitchu and Ula's statement about afilu, right, that even miyun she doesn't need, are unrelated conversations. However, Ikadami, an alternate version of this, Amr Ula, an alternate version of it has that Ula says that even if halacha lamaisa, a Ketana who accepted Kiddushin without the knowledge of her father, afilu miyun eino tzricha, ultimately, again, doesn't even need miyun. Fine. So therefore, I will say, we have an interesting machlokis going on over here. Ketana accepts Kiddushin without the knowledge of her father. What are the ramifications of that? So on one hand, you have Shmuel saying she needs a get and she needs miyun, and then all the way on the other side of that you have, and then you have Rav Nachman qualifying that, saying that's only if there were some previous discussions regarding a shidduch, and then all the way on the other side of that, you have Ula, who says that she doesn't need anything. That's our machlokes. Master Rav Kar is the kasha of a kulon imesu. Omianu onis garshu, oshinimtsu islandis, sarosen mutaros. And I will say back to all the way to the beginning of Yevamis. Remember again, Yevamis 101, right? Reuven's married to two wives, Rachel and Leah, unrelated to each other, right? Or they could be related to each other, right? Oh, actually, let's unrelated to each other. So I'll say, so what happens if halacha l'maisa, one of those women is an erva to the yavam? Right? For example, simple case, right? Reuven's married to Rachel and Leah, and Rachel happens to be Reuven's niece, Shimon his brother's daughter. Now Reuven dies. Both of them fall to Yibum before Shimon. What's the halacha? No Yibum. Why not? Because remember again, Yavamas 101, if one of the wives can't do Yibum, is an erva to the Yavam, she exempts the co-wives as well, but Sarah. Now watch this case. Now what happens if, let's say, the erva wife, Mesu, Omianu, Onis Garshu, Oshinim Sa'ilanis. Now in a case where the erva wife either again died, did miyun, was previously divorced before the husband died, or was found out to be an islandess. totally incapable of having children. So the Rabbi say then she effectively becomes ineligible for Yibum. Once she becomes ineligible for Yibum, then what? Then the co-wife is back in. The Gemara says, interesting, let me ask you this. So the Gemara says, the kid shaman. So I'll say, so in these cases over here, in this case specifically again, of Mianu Onis Gershu. So what's the case? Who is Makadisher? Ilema, so Miyun we're talking about. So the kid shaman. Ilema the kid Avia. If ultimately again we're talking about a case where her father is Makadisher, then B'Miyun Sagila. And I will say, one of the ways that the Mishnah brings up, one of the ways over here the Brisa brings up, that one of the ways that the Erva wife could be removed from the Yavam. Sorry, one of the ways in which the Erva wife could be removed from the Yibum equation, the Brisa said, is how Miyun. What's the case of Miyun? Right? What's the case of where the Erva wife is doing Miyun? If her father was Makadisher, then ultimately again Miyun's not enough. Right? So the Gemara says get Ma'al Yabaya. She would require a get. Elalav the kidsha ihi nafsha. Rather, it must be a case of where she was Makadesh herself, right? And that would be a case in which Miyun would be able to remove her from the Yibum equation. So you see from here what I will say, Vikatani tebaya Miyun, and yet she requires Miyun. What do you see from here? It's not like the strongest of proofs, but it's interesting nevertheless. But what you do see from here is that Aloha Lamaisa, if a Kitana apparently accepts Kiddushin on her own, that relationship still requires Miyun, which would seem to be a support to Shmuel and a kasha on Ula. So the Gemara says, Hu mosiv la v'hu mefarik la, kigon shenase la maisi yishon b'chayi ha'av. Now what are we talking about over here? We're talking about a girl, literally again, who was treated like an orphan during the lifetime of her father. Now what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi is about 4 lines off from the bottom. Maisi yishon b'chayi ha'av, kigon shesia v'yela acher. The case would be her father married her off, and then what happened? V'nis armala onis gersha. She was widowed or she was divorced as a ketana. Sharihi bechaye kiyisoma kevan sheyesia ein la avia reshus ba. Be'achari kein kitshiyes atzma la'achya avia. Tahani kiddushin ba'imiyun. Shla hayala lahamtin as das aviha b'miyun sagis. So let's listen to this. The case would be, it's actually an interesting case. Father marries off a ketana daughter, right? And then goes ahead, and now that ketana daughter is, let's say, widowed. So now I'll say, even though she's still a ketana, technically speaking, she is what we call a ketana. She is like a son b'chayavi. A father no longer has really any rights over her since she was already once married. Technically speaking, a girl like that, if she enters herself into marriage, she's still a ketana, which means that marriage could still be dissolved through miyun. That would be the case. Okay. To which the Gemara says, Maser Rav Hamnuna. Rav Hamnuna says, 1 second. Ein mochel krog. So we're also going in a different direction over here. Now I will say this is an interesting case. Now we know that a father has the ability to sell his daughter as an amma, as a Jewish maidservant. Now I will say the halacha by amma is, the ideal by amma is if a Jewish man purchases an amma, what's the ideal process? The ideal process is that he marries her. Right? That's the goal over here, right? And if he's not going to marry her, then what? Then his son will marry her. That's the ultimate goal of purchasing an Amma Ivriya. So based on that, the halacha is Emochro the Krovim. You're not allowed to sell your daughter to relatives. Why? Because marriage is impossible. So you really should only sell your daughter as an Amma Ivriya to someone who technically is able to marry her. Rashi says over here, Ein mochra lebita lekravim shim ein lahem kiddushin bahen. She'ein lahem kiddushin ba tebainon ruuya liyud. But say the process of marrying the Amma Ivriya is called yiyud. Yiyud literally means like designation. That ultimately, again, when you purchase an Amma Ivriya, the ideal is she's designated for marriage. So the Gemara says, Mishum Rabbi Lazar Amru, Mochro the Krovim. Rabbi Lazar says, no, you're allowed to go ahead and even sell her to Krovim. So we'll say, Machlokes in Rav Hamnuna and Rabbi Lazar, can you sell your daughter as an Amma Ivriya to someone who she cannot marry? Rabbi Hamnuna, no. Rabbi Lazar, yes. We'll say top of Memhei, V'shavin shemochra amar l'kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza l'kohen hayed. This is very interesting, but everyone agrees. Well, listen to this. Everyone agrees that a father could sell his daughter, who is an almana, right, to a kohen gadol, or if the daughter is a grusha, to a kohen hedyot. Now, those are illegal marriages. Now we'll say, but what's the halacha? even though they're not legal, technically speaking, what? They work. Right? In other words, we paskin not like Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is the only opinion who holds that ein kiddushin tofsin b'chai be'lavin, that marriage does not take effect in a relationship that is punishable by a lav. We do not paskin that way, and therefore, technically speaking, even though a Kohen Gadol can't marry an almana, if he did, the marriage works. Kohen Hedyot can't marry a grusha, a divorcee, but if he did, it works. So interestingly enough, as much as there's a machlokes Rav Hamnuna and Rabbi Elazar, can you sell your daughter to relatives? Everyone agrees that if she's a divorcee, you could sell her to a Kohen, and if she is a widow, you could sell her to a Kohen Gadol. The Gemara says, whoa, hi amona hechi dami. Rabbi say, what is the case? Now remember, Rabbi say, when could a father sell his daughter as an ama ivriya? Only when? What? When she's a ketana. She's a ketana. So what exactly is the case, ultimately, again, of a father selling his ketana daughter and she's an almana? What's that case? So if we're talking about a typical case where, let's say, again, he was makadish her as a ketana and her husband died, that can't be the case. Why? The halacha is that a father can't sell his daughter as a shivcha after having given her in marriage. In other words, once a father gives his daughter in marriage, he essentially relinquishes any further rights that he has in her. So he can't be talking about a case where he married her off, she was widowed as a ketana, and now he's selling her as a shivcha. That would not work. Rather, it must be alalav de kiddush ihi nafsha. It must be talking about a case where what? The ketana accepted kiddushin on her own. She accepted kiddushin, and now she's widowed, to which the father still has the right to go ahead and sell her as a shivcha. The kakari amana, and it's calling her an amana. What do you see from here? You see from here that halacha lamaisa, a father does, that if a ketana accepts kiddushin on her own, that halacha lamaisa, it works. Rav Amram Yitzchak, hacha b'kiddushay yiyud. No. What are we talking about over here? I'll say, actually, interesting. Totally switching gears over here. Kiddushay yiyud. What was the case? The case is where I will say that halacha l'maisa. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi is 3 lines down from the top. Shenis amla mekiddushay yiyud. And I will say, watch this. What was she widowed from? She was sold as a shivcha. The master did yiyud. Right now, I will say, we're going to see an interesting machlokes in the mechanics of how you marry your shivcha. So kiddushay yiyud means essentially master went ahead and stated his intent to marry her, and so look at Rashi, kiddushay yiyud shenis almana kiddushay yiyud vim tomar halo ayede avia baola. Now both saying, here's what's interesting. In general, we assume that how does kiddushay yiyud work? How does kiddushay yiyud work? You don't have to give additional kesef kiddushin. Why not? What is the kesef kiddushin? Kesef kiddushin is the purchase price. So, for example, if you have master purchases ama ivriya from Ruvain, right? So Ruvain sells his daughter Rachel as an ama ivriya. So now both say the money that Ruvain receives for the sale of his daughter becomes the kesef kiddushin. So when we speak about that she's an almana, we're talking about a case over here where she was widowed from kiddushay yiyud. Now Rashi points out over here, if that's the case, then essentially isn't that a situation where her father married her off, right? Because her father sold her. The kesef kiddushin is the purchase price, and therefore is the money given, and therefore again this is a marriage that she's entered into by her father. To which the Gemara says, no, Valiba Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Huda. And I will say it is in accordance with the visit of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Huda. Watch this. Da'amar Maos Harishonos Lav Likidushin Nitnu. Fascinating. We're going to see this. But there is a fascinating machlokes Rabbi about whether, and I actually saw it referenced, but we'll see it again as well. He'll say, is kiddushay yiyud, or I should say, when a man is mekadesh his ama ivriya, ultimately again, do we say that the purchase price is the kesef kiddushin, or does the master have to go ahead and give her additional monies? So if you hold that Allah it's the purchase price that is the kesef kiddushin, then enachinami, that is a marriage that she is entered into by her father. However, according to Rabbi Yossi, the master has to give additional funds. If he has to give additional funds, then technically speaking, this could be a marriage. Ultimately, this could be considered a marriage that she enters into of her own volition. And if she is widowed, right, in Kiddushin in that state, then Einach Inami, that could be a situation of halacha l'maisa, where she is widowed from a marriage undertaken of her own volition, in which case, technically speaking, the father might still have the right to go ahead and sell her to someone else. And that's when the Gemara says, if he sold her to a Kohen Gadol, even though, again, she's quote-unquote a widow, technically speaking, it could work. Okay, interesting. Both say, bottom line, halacha l'maisa, how do we go ahead and pass? In other words, what is the status, ultimately, again, of Kiddushay Ketana? What is the status? So both say, so the halacha, in other words, if a Ketana goes ahead and accepts Kiddushin on her own, what's the status of that Kiddushin? So the Rambam Paskins in Hilchos Ishus, Perek Gimel, Halacha Yud Gimel, the Rambam writes, Niskacha Kodem Shetivga Shol Das Aviyah, Eina Mekudeshas. The Rambam says, inconsequential. It's like any other actions of a katan or a ketana, totally inconsequential. Not only that, the Rambam, so therefore, again, if a ketana accepts Kiddushin on her own, it's meaningless. It doesn't require a get, and it doesn't even require miyun. Not only that, Rabbi said, listen to this. The Rambam writes, "Va'afilu im nisrat saha'av achar sheniskatsha." Even if the father consents to her actions ex post facto, still doesn't matter. Still doesn't matter. The actions of a ketana are halachically meaningless, and therefore, again, if she decides to accept kiddushin from a man, she doesn't need miyun, she doesn't need a get. Even if the father says great job afterwards, still halachically meaningless. That's why he paskin essentially like ula. Like ula, not essentially, like ula. Because it says the Gemara, Itmar, meis v'nafla l'fnei achiv liibum. So it's an interesting case. Now, I gave you the conclusion, but the Gemara didn't conclude yet. I just wanted to close that out. So we'll see, now watch this. It's continuation of the previous case. A girl, right, a ketana, accepted kiddushin without the knowledge of her father. Then what happens? Her husband dies. Her husband dies. So she just had kiddushin, right? Her husband dies. So what's the halacha? Now she falls for yibum. So let's say again, Rachel, a ketana, accepted kiddushin of her own without her father's consent from Ruvain. Okay, now Ruvain dies, and now Ruvain has a surviving brother. So Rachel falls to Shimon for yibum. What's the halacha? Amrav Huna Amrav Mima Enes Lema Amaro Ve'ina Mima Enes Lizei Kasal. Shabbos say this is an interesting statement. So ultimately, again, she needs miyun. Look at Rashi. Mima Enes Lema Amaro Tzricha miyun im get hamutal aleh im asa ba ma'amar osa get matzricha lios imomiyun. So we'll say so. We'll define it in just a moment, but Rav essentially says she's going to require ultimately again miyun with a get if there was maimar ve'ina mima enes lizei kaso. But ultimately again she doesn't require, if there was no maimar, then ultimately again she's not going to require a get, but rather she's only going to require chalitza. Now the Gemara says ketzad. We're going to define this right now. Ketzad. Asaba mamar. So we'll say, so here's the case. So just to put the whole chagadya over here, right? So Rachel is a ketana. Rachel accepted kiddushin from Ruvain without her father's consent. Fine kiddushin. Now Ruvain dies. Ruvain has a surviving brother Shimon. So now watch this. So the Gemara says a couple of different scenarios over here. Asaba maimer. So let's say Shimon, the Yavam, did maimer. Both say, what's maimer? What's maimer? Kishmo Kenu, it's a statement that says, I'm going to marry you, or money given that I'm going to marry you. What does maimer do? Not really anything. If there are other brothers, it maybe prevents the other brothers from doing yibum technically, right? But essentially, it's kiddushin. It's kiddushin, even though you don't really need kiddushin by yibum, you just need bia. All right, in any event, if the surviving brother Shimon did maimer, tzricha get or tzricha chalitza. Wow. So Rachel is going to require a get and going to require chalitza, utzricha miyun, and she's going to require miyun. So I'll say this is a lot of stuff going. So a get, chalitza, miyun. Why? The Gemara goes through each of these. Tzricha get, she needs a get. Why? Shemin esrat sa'ab b'kiddushay sheni. That is interesting. She requires a get, and we'll say why. Because maybe since Shimon, the Yavam, did mama, which means he gave her money, maybe the father wants the marriage with Shimon. Father never consented to the marriage about Ruvain, but now Shimon gave her money. Granted, he gave her money as Maimar, but Maimar still Kiddushin also. So maybe the father wants the marriage with Shimon, and therefore ultimately again she needs a get to dissolve that marriage, right? Tzricha chalitza, she requires chalitza, shemen etzratza bekiddushay rishon, because maybe the father wanted the first marriage, in which case again she was really married to Ruvain and now subject to Yibam with Shimon, and therefore she needs chalitza. Tzricha miyun, and she requires miyun. Why? Shemal hon etzratza av lo bekiddushay rishon v'lo bekiddushay sheni. Now let's say she requires miyun because maybe the father didn't want either of the two marriages. Now, again, if he didn't want either of the two marriages, then nothing's going on over here. Why does she need miyun? She needs miyun, I will say, because remember, she is receiving a get, she is receiving chalitza, so miyun is what essentially undoes everything and then allows Shimon, the Yavam, to marry Rachel's sister. Without miyun, we would say the Yomru this is a mess. The Yomru aim Kiddushin tovsim ba'achosa. So therefore, I will say this is incredible. So you hear this case? So one more time. So Rachel here, it's a pretty straightforward case. Rachel Kitana accepted Kiddushin from Ruvain without her father's knowledge. Fine. Step one. Ruvain dies. Rachel falls to Shimon, Ruvain's brother, for Yibum. So now what happens? So the Gemara says it depends. If Shimon did Maimar, then what? Then we need a get, chalitza, miyun, right? I need a get because maybe the father wanted ultimately, maybe the father ex post facto was happy with the Kiddushin from Shimon, second surviving brother. I need chalitza because maybe father wanted the first marriage to Ruvain, right? And I need miyun because maybe the father didn't want either marriage, but now that we required both a get and chalitza, people are going to think that Rachel is a divorcee, and therefore are going to say that Shimon, the surviving brother, can't marry Rachel's sister because it's the wife of his divorcee, or the wife of his chalutza, and therefore in order to go ahead and get around that, we do miyun, which upends the entire thing. Good. That's it. So Gemara says as follows. Law is about Maimer. Now that's only if he did Maimer. That's only if Shimon did Maimer. What if Shimon didn't do Maimer? Ultimately, again, in that case, also if there was no Maimer, then halach lamaisa, all Rachel is going to require is chalitza. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. My amrit tibai nami miyun shemi yomru in kiddushin tovsim bachosa. But I don't understand. We should require miyun because also remember again. Once you require chalitza, so what does chalitza do? Chalitza essentially broadcasts that this was a marriage, right? That this was a marriage. In which case, if she's a chalutza, then that means Shimon can't marry her sister. So the Gemara says, no. Here's the difference. Hakol yodim achos chalutza derabanan. They will say, here's the difference. The sister of your chalutza is a derabanan. That is not a daraisa. Dan Reish Lakish kan shana Rabbi achos grusha midaraisa. Achos chalutza midivrei sofrim. Everyone knows the sister of the woman you divorced is an Isser Daraisa. The sister of the woman that ultimately you did chalitza with is quote unquote only D'Rabbanan. Now I will say, therefore again, since we're only dealing with the D'Rabbanan, and again there's so much other stuff going on over here, therefore Allah Lamaisa, people are not going to assume that Shimon can't marry can't marry the sister of Rachel. Okay, now I will say, now I just want to point out, it's a fascinating case and like a riveting Gemara. I gave you the conclusion already, so you already know that these cases really never get off the ground, right? They never get off the ground because we paskin like Ula, that if a Ketana accepts Kiddushin without the consent of her father, her actions are inconsequential. So remember again, these cases never go anywhere, right? These cases would never come up, halach lamaisa, because to begin with, her actions are deemed halachically inconsequential. Good. Some interesting cases here will say, Hano beitrei davakashasi chamra, tusi sifi bebavel. Actually sounds like a nice case. Two guys are drinking wine underneath the myrtle tree. Right? Underneath the myrtle tree in Bava. And I both say, by the way, I'll point out to you something very interesting. Tzafzefa, Rashi points out there, Tachas ilani tzafzefa shehu min arava. I will say, how beautiful. We're in the intermediate days right before Sukkot. Right before Sukkot. There's a machlokes in the Mishnah and Sukkah if tzafzefa is a usable arava or not. How incredible is that? So machlokes, is tzafzefa a good arava or not? It's a different type. So we'll say, so here the Gemara tells us, so beautiful. So here, again, the days leading up to the beautiful Yom Tov, Zman Simcha Sinu leading up to Sukkot, what does the Gemara give us? A little bit of extra Simcha. Two guys sitting underneath the tzafzefa tree, going ahead and drinking wine in Bavel. It's It's beautiful. Incredible, I'll say. So what happens? So Shakal Chamina Casa de Chamra. So one guy took his glass of wine. Yarv Lechavre gave it to his friend. Amar, Mikachli Bartech Libre. He said, with this cup of wine, your daughter should become Mikudeshes to my son. All right. The dangers of drinking too much with friends, right? So listen to this. So this is a fascinating case. So just look what's happening. So Reuven and Shimon sitting together, right, drinking wine under the tzaftzafah in Bavel. Reuven takes a glass of wine, hands it to Shimon, and he says, Shimon, with this glass of wine, ultimately again, my daughter, or your daughter should become Mikudeshes to my son. Right? So essentially the father of the son is giving the wine, Kesef, right? Shava Kesef, to the father of the girl as Kiddushin. Okay, so the Gemara says, now let's take a step back over here. Right, now remember, so the daughter, look at Rashi, now we saw before that there was an opinion that said that ex post facto, so if the father agrees to the Kiddushin Ketana, it works, fine. Even according to the opinion that says that a father of a girl could agree to a marriage after the fact, right? Amud Beis, Rabbi say. So the Gemara says, Amud Beis, Shemen Esratza haben lo amrinon. Rabbi say, the one thing that we do not do in halacha is that the father of a groom, the father of a boy, cannot commit his son to marriage without his son's knowledge. There's no such concept like that in halacha. There's a concept of a father marrying off a daughter without her knowledge, right? A father has that right in his daughter who's a kitana, but no such parallel right applies to a son. Look at Rashi. Shemen Esratza ben tap Rashi mem chesam beis. So b'kiddushin shekidish lo av shalom midayto lo aminon ta'ab b'kiddushay bita b'chol du nechalei the tav de lamesav tan du milamesav amla aval gavra dayek v'nase v'chein einer b'shus aviv l'kadish lo isha shlo b'shlucho. So I'll say it's interesting. So Rashi gives two interpretations. Rashi says, first of all, again, obviously, just looking societally, that marriage meant something so different for men than it did for women. Right? For women, it was a sense of security, financial security, physical security, and therefore there was a concept of marrying off even a young girl without her knowledge or consent. For men, it wasn't like that, and therefore Allah said there's no. You don't even have to get into that. There's just biblical concepts, right? There's a biblical concept, whatever the hashkafa of it is, or the tamei mitzvah of it is. There's a concept ultimately again of a father marrying off his minor daughter. There is no such concept of a father marrying off his son without his consent or knowledge. Again, there's a concept of shlichus, but even shlichus requires what? Shlichus requires das of the mishaleach. So the Gemara says, Shemen Esratza ben lo amrino. So therefore, this whole case doesn't work. This whole case doesn't work because the father of the son has no right to enter his son into a relationship without the knowledge of the son. Maybe in this case, the son appointed his father as a shaliach. So which the Gemara says this is incredible. I will say, a son would never appoint his father as a shaliach. That would be a chutzpah. That'd be a chutzpah. I was about to say, to ask your father to do something for you, right? To ask your father to be a shliach for you, that would be a tremendous chutzpah. A son would never do that. I will say, it doesn't mean that a child doesn't ask his father for things, right? Of course, that's ma'aseh b'chol yom. What it means is asking your father to be your shaliach, right? Asking your father to execute something on your behalf. That's not something that a son would. That's not something that a son would do. V'dilma artsuye artse kamei. Well, maybe we'll say maybe the case over here is in this case the son happened to have been talking to his father, just about this particular young lady, right? So maybe again the father knows that the son is interested in this shidduch. Look at Rashi actually for just a moment. Rashi says, "Ben kamei aviv v'gila lo daito shu chafetz ba." Maybe the son was talking about this girl to his father. That he's interested in the shidduch. Va'avnas alo shliach me'elav v'zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. Oh, okay, so fine. So a son would never ask his father to be a shaliach. But maybe the son was talking to his father just about shidduchim, and he expressed interest in this young lady. And then what happens? The father's sitting, they're drinking wine under the tzaftzafah. There's an opportunity, zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. Even though I will say it's interesting to think that marrying someone off is zachin. Right? Because it's interesting, because remember again, zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav means something that's an objective schos. It's interesting whether or not, and just listen to the rest of the statement, whether or not marriage is an objective schos. They must say, now why do I say that? Of course marriage is an objective schos, right? So my wife sometimes listens to the podcast while cooking, so I have to, so of course marriage is an objective schos. So I'll say, no, what it means is, remember, if marriage to one person precludes what? Marriage to someone else. So that's why, again, remember, technically speaking, anything that could limit you in other areas may or may not be. Okay, but in any event, clearly the havmin of the Gemara is that if this young man expressed interest in marrying this young woman, perhaps it's zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav, to which the Gemara says, Amar le Rabbi Bar Simi b'feirush Amar Mar, to lo savar lahad Rabbi Shmuel. So we'll say ultimately again, no, he doesn't hold of Rabbi Shmuel. What's in other words? Meaning what? He doesn't hold of this idea that a father has the ability to go ahead and engage in this process. Look at Rashi. Beferish shamati mimenu delo savarle l'Rav Shmuel dein choshesh and shemen esrat sa'av v'choshekein l'shema asoi haben shliach. Now we'll say this case is ridiculous. This doesn't work. In other words, we don't pass like Rabbi Shmuel that, namely, that a father could go ahead and agree to his kitana daughter's actions ex post facto, and we certainly don't hold to this idea that a father could enter his son into marriage without explicit instructions from his son. And therefore, again, Rabbi say this case, although it sounds so beautiful, two friends sitting under the tzaftzafah bush, the tzaftzafah tree in Bavel, drinking wine and agreeing to the marriage of their children. It sounds so beautiful, and it actually sounds like such a great way, right, to create shidduchim. But nevertheless, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because, again, we don't hold that a ketana could go ahead and enter into relationships on her own, even if her father subsequently consents. And certainly, again, a father can't enter his son into a relationship without the express permission or direction of his son. Incredible. Hahu Gavra, the Kaddish Bekish of the Yaakov. It's an interesting case. There was a guy who was Mekadesh. I will say this seemingly is an unrelated case, except Rashi says over here, it's interesting. There was a guy who was Mekadesh a girl, and Rashi points out this is a case of Kitana Shalola Das Aviha. So Ruvain goes over to Rachel. Rachel is a Kitana without the consent of her father and is Mekadesh her. How is he Mekadesh her? With a bundle of vegetables in the shuk. So Ravina said, even according to the opinion who says that if the father agreed ex post facto that the Kiddushin would be good, that's only if the man is going to be Mekadesh the woman in a proper way. Derech covered. Aval derech bizayin though. But if you're not going to do it right, in other words, right, if you're not going to go ahead and give a girl kiddushin in the right way, and it's going to be something degrading, derech bizayon, no. So what's the bizayon over here? Bizayon demai, bizayon diyarka. Is it that he's using vegetables? In other words, is that it? In other words, that he's been being Mekadesh? Now, obviously, we'll say it's Shava Pruta, but come on, right? You're giving her a bundle of vegetables. That's the Kiddushin. Or is it Bizayon the Shuka? Or I will say, is it the fact that you're doing Kiddushin in the marketplace, which I will say, again, is just a lack of kavod to the process. So the Gemara says, so my nafkamina, so the Gemara's nafkamina, the kaddish bekaspa b'shuka. Nafkamina would be if you gave her money, but you gave her in the shuk, but he gave it to her in the shuk. Oh, bekish diakabesa, or, chivalry is not dead. You brought the vegetables to her home, right? You got down on one knee, and you gave her the vegetables. So I'll say, so that would be the nafkamina. So the Gemara says, so my amrle idi v'idi derech bizayon. Both ways, the guy is a loser, right? In other words, we'll say, so again, both because he did it, right? He did it in the shuk, right? Did it in the shuk. So we'll say, again, the act of doing it in the shuk ultimately, again, represents that this is like another. What do you do in the shuk? Right? You buy your hummus and you're going ahead and you're giving kiddush. In other words, the shuk is a transactional place. Kiddushin requires koved rosh, requires ultimately a sense of concentration and reverence. So number one, you can't do kiddushin in the shuk. We'll say the other part, by the way, of course, in the shuk is that it could look also like a shtickle immoral. Giving a woman money in the shuk could also mean different things. So number one, it's transactional, doesn't look right. And number two, vegetables, as much as it is a shava pruta, vegetables is derech bizayon. So we'll say either way, this is not good. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. So this is a great case. Listen to this. There was a couple, And I will say, get ready for this, they had a disagreement. Right? Married couple, and they had a disagreement. So what was the disagreement? I will say, they're marrying off a child, a daughter. The husband, all right, the husband said, I want our daughter to marry one of my relatives. Right? And the wife said, no, I want our daughter to marry one of my relatives. Kaf say ad the amr le tevel kriva. So we'll say the wife won the argument. Kaf say literally means like she bound him. In other words, okay, she wore him down, right? In other words, she won. She won. And finally decided, okay, our daughter's going to marry one of the wife's relatives. So the Gemara says, ad the amr le tehavi le kriva. Ad the achli v'shabos says, what happens? They made the vart. So they're making the vart, having the suda where the Kiddushin is going to occur. Fine. Ad the achli v'shasi. Asa krive be'igra v'kadsha. What's the ready for this? As they're having the suda to celebrate the Kiddushin. Now the Kiddushin didn't occur yet, right? But this is a suda to celebrate the upcoming Kiddushin. One of the husband's relatives was Mekadesh the girl, literally in the attic. Right? Took her to the attic, was Mekadesh her in the attic. Okay, of course the husband knew nothing about this. Right? I knew nothing. Rashi says over here, Bekidsha, Beseiser, Vadayin lo kibala av Kiddushin mikav shel ishto. So both say, so a case over here, so one of the relatives came, was Mekadesh her in the attic. So both say, so what? So both say, now again, in all seriousness, the father did not know about this. The father did not know about this. So this is a case of Kiddushay Ketana Shalol Das Aviyah. So what's the halacha? Rabbi, Ksiv Sheis Yisrael Lo Yasu Avla. Pasuk says Klal Yisrael doesn't lie. V'lo Yidabru Chazav. Shabbos said no. In this case, clearly the father would not agree to this. He made a commitment to his wife that the daughter was going to marry one of the wife's relatives, and certainly the father would not go back on his word. Rava says chazaka ein adam torech besuda mafsida. So Rava says there's a chazaka that a person doesn't go ahead here, and both say in this case the husband spent all of this money to make this suda celebrating the upcoming kiddushin to his wife's family member. If now this Kiddushin works, he's going to have to make another Suda. But it's like a person doesn't spend money for nothing. So the fact that the husband made the Suda indicates that no, he's committed to his daughter marrying one of the relatives of the wife, and clearly he does not consent to this Kiddushin. So the Gemara says, my benai, what's the nafkamini? So what's the nafkamini would be a situation where, let's say, there was the Suda, but the father himself didn't have to go ahead and toil for the Suda. Let's say somebody else paid for the Suda. So again, in that case, maybe the father would have been okay with the Kiddushin. I will say, again, like I said, bottom line, these cases, while they're fascinating, halacha l'maisa, again, don't really go ahead and really come up halacha l'maisa. Why? Because we paskin that any time that a ketana goes ahead and does Kiddushin on her own, it is inconsequential. And like the Rambam said, even if after the fact the father agrees, halacha l'maisa, the Kiddushin still is not halachically bad. All right, well, so stop over here for today. Tremendous yashikayach. Continue tomorrow, Mir Hashem.